Oh,
All right, and we're live. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us live today from the comfort of quarantine. We're very glad that everyone can make it today. At any time during today's talk, please feel free to post questions for our guest using the YouTube comments feature. We'll be asking your questions at the end of the interview. We're very lucky to be joined by our guest Uzma Jalaluddin, an author, teacher, and journalist from the Toronto Star. In the spirit of journalism today, we're getting ready together to learn a little bit more about Uzma and her story. Thank you for being here with us today, Uzma.
hi. It's such an honor. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. So tell us about yourself.
Well, like you said, I'm I'm like a lot of us. I wear a lot of different hats. My day job is I'm a high school science and English teacher. So right now we're in March break, and then we're in quarantine. But after that, I'll be back to teaching grade 9 science. I was born and raised in Toronto, in the east end of the city in Scarborough. I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit here. And yeah, so I was raised in a very close knit Toronto East End Muslim community. My parents immigrated from India in the 1970s. And yeah, so I've been a Toronto girl all my life. And right now I live a little bit north of the city. I'm married. I have 2 young children, not so young anymore. My older son is 15 and my younger is 12. And I write books. I'm a
That's great.
Yeah, it is. It's very, sorry, go on.
And why did they choose Toronto?
Why did they choose Toronto?
Yeah, to immigrate from India to Toronto.
So my father actually first came to the United States as a student. So he was a graduate student, and he came in 1969, 1970, something like that. And he went to the University of Louisiana, and he did his master's there, and he went on to the University of Dallas. So he's a biochemist. And then, it's funny with immigrants. A lot of times where you end up depends on either where you can find a job or if you know someone in the city. So
that's very true.
One of his best friends got into York University in a PhD program and said, "Hey, why don't you come to Toronto? We could room together. It's a great city. They're accepting immigrants a lot more easily back then than the United States." And so my dad ended up in Toronto. It was, it's such a serendipitous decision that led to so many different things, but really it was because his friend was there.
That's great.
Yeah.
And so I know you're a columnist at the Toronto Star. When did you start your column at the Toronto Star?
I started my column in the first column was printed in December 2014. So I always say 2015. And the very first column, I remember, it was a total shot in the dark. I wrote this really funny piece about having the birds and the bees talk with my son at the time was 7. And he was starting to ask me questions about like sex and things like that. And I was like, oh no, how am I going to answer this? But I'm a high school teacher. I'm used to being asked all sorts of crazy questions. So I did my research. I bought some books. I had this awkward conversation with him. And the result was just this hilarious moment of parenting that I decided this would be really funny. And I've been a reader of the Star since I was a kid. So I know the types of stories that they like. So I wrote something up and I Googled who's the editor of the life section of the Star. And I just sent it to them, hoping that they would like it. And they did.
That's great. And why did you choose to write specifically about culture and parenting?
I think the column has evolved. So initially, it was just a little vignette. The way that I thought about that initial story and a couple of the stories right afterwards was just a little snapshot into what my life was like. And I've always considered myself sort of a humor writer. So I guess I always see the light side of things. And the same thing happened with my book. I just wrote the story that was interesting to me. And then I kind of let other people worry about how they're going to market it and what they're going to call it to get readers. But I just write what I find interesting. And for me, right now is like at the time, a mother of very young children, and now they're like slightly older. That's my life. I'm just writing about my life as a mom, as a teacher, as a writer, as a visible Muslim woman. All of those types of things are what kind of occupy my mind.
And what compelled you to write AYESHA at Last?
Aisha at Last was a very long process. So I started writing it in 2010, and it wasn't done, and I sold it in 2017. And I think initially, and the sort of thing that sort of compelled me through the many years of writing the novel was just this idea that there aren't a lot of stories that are light or comedic about the Muslim community, and yet we have so many funny stories. We have so many romantic stories. And since I am a writer, I thought this is a great opportunity for me to share some of those intimate portrayals of South Asian Muslim life in Toronto that maybe no one else is privy to, but I am. So A, it's because I'm a writer and I just couldn't help myself because I love to write. But B, it was also because I just saw the lack of representation and I thought I could do something about it.
For sure. And 7 years is a long time
It is
to write.
forever.
Yeah, no, but that's great. And can you tell us more about the book?
Mhm. For sure. So Aisha at Last is a Pride and Prejudice retelling set in a close-knit Toronto Muslim community. It features two main characters who are modeled after the main characters of Pride and Prejudice. So there's Khalid Mirza, and Khalid Mirza is a very pious, very sheltered, sort of naive young man. He walks around and he's also a very visible Muslim man. And I constructed him in such a way that he almost caricatures some of the the Hollywood villains that are Muslim. So he has a long beard. He has like a goofy skull cap. He wears like a long white robe, and he's very pious. And first impression of him is everyone is like, ooh, when they look at how he dresses, they want to cross the street because they think he looks scary. And he's also a little awkward. So he's very much like Mr. Darcy, but he has a heart of gold and he's looking for love basically throughout the entire book. And then my Elizabeth Bennet character, her name is Aisha, the title character of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And she is a young spoken word poet who lives with her extended family in the East End of Toronto. And their worlds collide and magic happens.
That's great. And why specifically did you choose Pride and Prejudice as a topic and inspiration for this book?
I've spoken about this before. It was an accident, the very best kind of accident that results in something great. And I didn't set out to write a retelling. I thought I was going to be an original writer and just write my own words, write a story that no one has ever heard of before. And it wasn't until I was years into the draft that a friend who was a writer was reading my work and she said, "Oh, you're writing Pride and Prejudice. Oh, I can see Mr. Darcy and Khalid." And I said, no, it's not. And then I read it over and I realized, yeah, there are a lot of elements in my earlier drafts that are similar to the Pride and Prejudice story. And at the time when I was writing, as I said, there just aren't a lot of Muslim commercial fiction books that are about romance or about things that are more about lighter topics that my book is sort of involved in. A romantic comedy starring pious Muslims in Toronto. I think I'm the first one that's ever written about this community at all, but definitely in this way in Canada. So I think I was feeling a little insecure. I was thinking, at the time, it's not like I had an agent or an editor or any ties to publishing at all. I'm a high school teacher. So I decided it would be better for me if I could kind of use Pride and Prejudice as sort of like a framing device. So it's like a little frame around my story, and people are very familiar and love Pride and Prejudice. And if I say, oh, my book is a Pride and Prejudice retelling, it would just be more comfortable for them, because I don't think a lot of people willingly pick up stories that are set in other cultures unless there's something in it for them in a way. So it was really about my insecurity as a writer, as a first-time writer. But the other reason is I just love Jane Austen. I'm a huge fan. Like I said, I teach in high school English. I love books in general, but she's one of my favorite authors. So it was comforting and it was fun.
That's great. And it's great that you're the first author to come about and write a book about Pride and Prejudice. What do you want the readers to take away from this book?
I'm not the first author who's written.
Here in Toronto and in the Muslim community, for sure.
I think it depends. I think it depends on where you're coming from. So if, for instance, for my readers who share a faith-based background, such as myself, whether they're Muslim or from other faiths, I want them to see that, sort of that experience reflected in my novel. So here are two characters who are very much spending the entire book sort of navigating their identity from their religion and from their faith, and also what is it like to live in a secular world like Toronto, coming from that perspective. But at the same time, for my readers who are coming at it from other perspectives, I wanted them to get a glimpse inside this world that maybe they've never seen before. And I was really aware that some of my readers might never have spoken to a Muslim before, or really interacted or had any like deep, meaningful friendship. And I was providing sort of an inside look into this community. So it was important for me to make sure that it was authentic to my own lived experience. And at the same time, to point out to the readers that, look, this is just my experience. There are multiple different Muslim narratives out there. I'm not the only story, I'm one story. But bottom line, I just wanted to write a really fun, romantic, entertaining book that was set in this community, because I think those are in short supply. A lot of times books that are set in immigrant and marginalized communities are very much about pain, the pain that this community is facing. And we kind of don't see the ingenuity, the fun, and the romance.
That's true. That is very true. And what was the most difficult part of writing this book?
Writing it. Writing it was
what was the most difficult part while you were writing it in the 7 years?
So my story is, I'm sure like a lot of writers, actually, I don't even know if it's like a lot of writers. My first draft, I wrote it very fast. I wrote it in 2010, 2011, probably in 3 months. I was done the entire book. And then I spent the next 7 years revising it. So revisions were the most difficult part for me. It was just, your first draft is kind of like, it's just like this mound of words.
Yeah, you're excited.
Yeah. I was discovering the story as I was writing it. But I've realized, because now I've written a couple of books, that I am a drafter. So what that means is that I write furiously, as fast as I can. In a couple of months, I will finish a 100,000 word draft. And then I kind of sit and look at it, and I'm like, oh no, what have I done? I don't even know what the story is. I don't know who the characters are. Or what am I doing? So then I have my like existential crisis after I've drafted, which is not good. I think I should do the other way around. First have the existential crisis and then start drafting. So I think it was really just, even though I'm such a voracious reader, and I always have been, learning how to write the book was the hard part of writing the book. And I know that doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's just, what is the structure? Or what are the beats? How does a book have to be paced? Does everyone hate my character? What's wrong with my character that I need to fix my main character? That was a real problem. Everyone who read my book, I had a couple friends who were reading it. They're like, we love Khalid, we hate AYESHA. And I was like, well, the book's about AYESHA. I have to do something about that. So yeah, it was great. It was, but I've always been a lifelong learner, and I learned a lot while I was writing it. So I'm grateful for the experience.
It seems like it. And with a lot of editing and writing the draft very fast, what was one thing you wish was not edited out of your book?
I think by the time it was ready to be sold and sent to publishers and things like that, and I ended up with HarperCollins Canada, and my editor there was very, very supportive. So I don't know how other writers are, but for me, I just don't think of it in that way. Everything that was meant to be in the book is in the book, and everything that was taken out because it didn't need to be there. And in a way, that's the editing process is really where the book comes to life. So if you ask my husband this question, he's read every single draft along the way, and he'll say, oh, there was this one character who was really funny, and he was AYESHA's little brother's friend, and he was hilarious. He had all these great one-liners. So he misses that character, and I'm like, look, listen, I had to get rid of him because he wasn't serving the plot. He was just amusing. That's all he was. So, but for me, I don't have any. I don't have any regrets about anything that was taken out of the book that I can recall at the top of my head.
That's great. That's important. At least the readers know that everything is there. And so what is one main takeaway you hope your readers take when reading this book?
I hope they'll understand. Just one. Diversity among diverse communities. That's the way that I like to put it. I hope they'll understand that there isn't just one type of Muslim or one type of Indian,
That's true.
that there's diversity.
For sure. And you mentioned how Jane Austen is one of your role models. Who are your role models, and who can you look up to as someone who represents you in the media or in your field?
Oh, that's a really hard question. I don't know. I know there's a lot of writers that I admire and I read their work. I love Shri Paradkar in the Toronto Star. I look up to her a lot. Some of my fellow writers, S.K. Ali is a very good friend of mine, and she writes YA novels with Muslim characters. Asma Zahan Khan writes mystery and fantasy novels, also set with Muslim characters. And the three of us are very good writer friends, so I think I look up to them and respect them a lot. Yeah, I think of those three people.
It's great to have to look up to many people. You gain different perspectives and
Definitely.
you apply it into your own writing. That's awesome. So some may look up to you as a spokesperson of a minority who wrote for the mainstream. Did you face any backlash while writing?
From my own community?
Yes.
No, actually, I get this question a lot. It's funny. All the Muslims want to know what the non-Muslims think, and all the non-Muslims want to know what the Muslims think. So it's really funny. No, my community, like I said, I'm part of a very close-knit community. And I don't know what people are saying behind my back, but to my face, they're they're very supportive, and they always have been. I've been invited to book clubs. Community members have done events inside the mosque. There's a lot of word of mouth, but at the same time, I have to acknowledge that my book is very light. Like it's a very positive portrayal of Muslims. And I wonder if I had written something that was a little bit more critical, whether it would have had such universal acclaim. So I have to acknowledge that. My book is very. It has a lot of nuance to it, but it's ultimately a very positive portrayal of my community. But to be honest, even my book does deal with pornography, homelessness, forced marriage, abuse, toxic relationships. There are some serious elements in my novel too, and yet my community members, a lot of them said that we need to talk about this. We need to talk about mental health, for instance.
For sure.
Yeah.
And how do you deal with it? How do you deal with being a minority who wrote for mainstream?
I started writing during this movement in publishing. It started off, I would say, in the early 2014, 2015, and it's called the We Need Diverse Books movement, and it's something that's become very popular in the mainstream, and as a result, it's just opened up, I think, publishers' eyes to the need for more diverse narratives, but also the potential for reaching new markets, which is something that I think any corporation loves to hear about, targeting new markets with who have money to spend. And so in a sense, I think if I'd been trying to write my book, as I said, I started writing my book in 2010. If I tried to get it published in, say, 2012, there's no way that AYESHA at Last would have been published. I would have gotten a lot of rejections, and it would not be in the bookstores at all. And that's not to say that I don't think I'm a strong writer. I just don't think the messaging was something that was really widespread and really something that people were looking for at that time. So my AYESHA at Last was published in 2018 in Canada, and I think it landed right when it needed to land. And I've forgotten your question. I'm sorry. I'm a rambler.
It's okay. I said, how did you deal with it and everything? It's okay. So does being a spokesperson in this way take a toll on your mental health? You mentioned a lot about mental health previously and how it needs to be addressed.
On my mental health, no, I don't think so. However, and I know what you're getting at. I think at the same time, as a writer who looks the way I do and who dresses the way I do and who is, I have intersectional identities. I'm a woman. I'm a Muslim. I'm a South Asian. I'm the child of immigrants. All of that definitely comes to play in the sense that I see the world. And I think what has happened is I've just I've been in situations where I've had to deal with other people's ignorance, but I've also had to, realize that for myself that there are certain ways that I can deal with it, and certain ways that are healthy that I can deal with it, and other ways that I can't. So one thing that is really important for me is to have a network of people who understand where I'm coming from. So the two writers that I mentioned before, we help each other a lot. So if we've had like an uncomfortable conversation, or we've been asked questions or been asked to do things that are kind of like, oh my God, you would never ask another writer these questions. It's a safe space to vent. And I think that is so incredibly important to have that support system in place when you set off on this journey. Writing is very lonely. Yeah.
Yeah, it's important to have that comfort
Yeah.
and ability to just have that freedom to speak, for
Yes,
sure.
exactly.
Do you think that Canada is as welcoming to diverse people as people think it is?
I don't think anywhere is as welcoming to diverse people as people think it is. I wouldn't blame Canada overly. I mean, we always compare ourselves to the United States, and we say, "Oh, we're a lot more welcoming."
Yeah.
I've had a wonderful experience with my publishing team in Canada, and so I feel like my experience is probably skewed. However, at the same time, I have had to deal with, for instance, audiences during I've done a lot of events. I've spoken to large crowds, small crowds, anywhere from tiny book clubs to big university theaters. And for the most part, people are very interested in the things that I have to say. But I also do get, some strange questions. A lot of people are very fascinated, for instance, with the fact that my book deals with arranged marriage customs. And so I get questions like, "Oh, what about you? Did you have an arranged marriage?" Very personal questions. And also I've had very combative experiences where some people question, for instance, why I wear hijab, or what's the purpose behind it, or what do I think about far-reaching political issues that have nothing to do with my book. But because I am a representative of all Muslims, which is how unfortunately most minority people are treated. You are not just yourself, but you are the representative of your entire people. I get asked some questions like that.
So have you ever experienced racial profiling?
Not in the sense that I've been stopped and frisked by a police officer, but in the sense that when I walk into a room sometimes this happens when I walk into a classroom, and the immediate assumption is, "Oh, that's a teacher? Oh, okay. Do you speak English?" I'm like, "Yes, I'm your English teacher, actually." So I've experienced it in my regular life as a high school teacher, in my life as a writer, definitely. I oftentimes if I'm invited to participate in a panel, for instance, I'm invited either to participate in a panel on diverse literature, because I'm the person who looks like the diverse literature, or I'm the only person on the panel who is a person of color. So both of those things has happened to me in the past. Yeah, publishing is still very much a white space. And I think they know that. And so they're working hard on correcting that. But change is coming, but it's slow.
Slowly. Yeah, for sure. And what have been your experiences while crossing the border with your family as a Canadian Muslim?
I actually wrote about this in one of my columns, and I wrote about how before crossing the border, I never really I felt a little bit uncomfortable, but not specifically targeted. And it was soon after Trump was elected as president of the United States. And my family and I had planned a trip, just a road trip. We wanted to go see the Grand Canyon, which is amazing. You should definitely go. And I was really nervous. I thought, I don't want to bring undue attention to my family. I don't want to, I don't know what it will be like traveling in the United States in the post-Trump era. So what I did, there's a picture online, you can actually see it. I actually, this is a very visible hijab, but instead what I did was I bought one of those like woolen beanies, and I just wore it. I wish I had it. I could show you. It was I was wearing a hat. And so even when we were flying and I showed my passport to the passport control, and they looked at it and they looked at me and they're like, "This is you?" Because they didn't realize that I was a hijab wearing woman. I said, yeah, that's me. And they were like, "Okay, fine." But I was wearing hijab. It was just, it was an undercover hijab. So that level of just feeling vulnerable, I think, is something that a lot of POC really would be able to empathize with. I was very aware of who was walking behind me, who was looking at me a little bit too long, and I just on a heightened sense of alert. In the end, everyone was really nice.
So it's good. So everything is
great.
Nothing happened. Yeah. And as an immigrant, do you have more of a sense of belonging back home or here in Toronto?
I'm not an immigrant. I was born in Toronto. So yeah, as I said at the top of the.
But do you ever felt like you have a belonging back home? Do you, even though like India? Your
No,
parents are from India? No,
no, no,
you
not.
feel okay,
Yeah,
great.
sorry, I was interrupting you. What? Go ahead.
No, no worries, no worries. I was just wondering if you felt, because as I am Brazilian and I live in Canada, but I feel a sense of belonging back in my home country, Brazil. So I was just wondering if you ever felt a sense of belonging back in India in comparison to Toronto.
So I'm not from India, so it would be every time I went back to India, it was as a visitor, never as
Okay,
someone who had ever lived there. I
okay.
only went for 2 weeks at a time, and as much as
Mhm,
I feel a lot of fondness for my family and the beautiful things that I saw in India and the
mhm.
amazing food that I ate, it was never home. So Canada
Okay,
has always been my home, and
so Canada's okay.
yeah, and like when I look at my children, they're third generation. So their grandparents are from India. So
Okay,
just they don't even know any other language except English and French.
in French.
So that's what's going to happen probably with you and the next
Mhm,
generation. You just get more and more far removed. However, I do wear the clothes sometimes.
mhm.
I eat Indian food on a not all the time, but some
Of
regularly,
course,
I
yeah.
would say. I do speak the language, so I have strong ties to India, but not as a citizen or as like
Okay,
a sense of it being home. Canada's a
okay.
home. Yeah.
That's clarified. Thank you. And what differences do you notice between Toronto and the rest of Canada with regards to inclusion and diversity?
I would like to visit more of Canada. I was actually invited to Calgary in the fall, and which was for our conference, which was a great trip. And I've seen parts of Western Canada, mostly just like the bigger cities. And there is a real difference in terms of the diversity of people who live in Toronto is one of the most diverse places in the world, right? I was really taken aback actually. So I was there for it was a Muslim women's conference, and they asked me to speak, and I said, yeah, sure. I've never seen Calgary. I'll come. And they were lovely, and the person who was sort of taking me around was also a young hijabi woman who was an accountant. And so she was taking me around, and Calgary is a beautiful city, just gorgeous. They have the best coffee. It's a small city though. So we went to the downtown core, and they were having, this was before the federal election. There was this anti Trudeau rally, and it was like big signs at it were like F Trump, F Trudeau, and all of these scary looking people, and we're just kind
For
of
sure.
around the parliament. And she was like, oh yeah, just casually, she's like, yeah, a couple weeks ago, we were told, I got a Facebook message from a community group saying, if you're a visible Muslim, don't go downtown, because there are this group there that are part of the alt right. So just don't go downtown. And she just said this like it wasn't a big deal, and I was like, "What are you talking about? That's insane."
Yeah.
She wears a hijab. I was so worried for her. But I mean, that stuff happens in Toronto too. There are all sorts of people who make up our country, and it's scary though sometimes when you think about those types of things. And of course, after the Quebec mosque shooting as well,
Yeah.
the community has come under attack in a lot of ways.
Yeah, for sure. And just to finalize, do you have a second book you're working on, just out
Yeah.
of curiosity, and plans for the future?
Yeah, so I just finished the edits on my second novel. I signed a 2-book deal with HarperCollins, which I'm very excited about.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. It's very exciting. And so my second book is hopefully it'll come out in 2021, so sometime in 2021. And the way I've been describing it is there was a 1995 movie called You've Got Mail, which was really famous. And my novel is You've Got Mail, set in rival halal restaurants. So basically, the main characters are professional rivals, and they don't like each other in person, but online they're friends, and they don't know because they're friends anonymously. So it's
Okay,
another romantic comedy.
that's interesting. That will for sure turn out to be great.
Thank you.
Now we would like to take questions, of course. Now we would like to take questions from the audience. So if you've not sent any questions yet, be sure to send them now. And we're just going to wait from the audience. Okay, so here we go. Our first question. Pride and Prejudice was a very feminist, forward-thinking book for its time, despite being categorized as a romance novel. Do you believe feminism and feminist practices have a place in journalism?
Yeah, yeah, I definitely do. I'm not a journalist per se, so I can't talk about the history of journalism in this regard. But I think that feminism is sort of the way that you think about journalist profession, and also just if you're thinking about print journalism, like writing rooms and the office. Who what it comes down to with Jane Austen is who gets to tell the story, and she had to tell very domesticated stories because that was her sphere. She wasn't actually allowed to go outside into the world of business as a woman in the Regency era. She didn't have any rights. She couldn't vote. She couldn't own property. She couldn't inherit anything except whatever her family wanted. And yet, despite that, she crafted these beautiful satirical stories about what is it like to be a woman of her era. And I think feminism and feminist practices in journalism are basically trying to say, look, we have a voice, women have a voice. We need a place at the table to be able to share our points of view as well. So it's incredibly important, I think.
I think so as well. Thank you. Here, someone's congratulating on all your success of your novel since it's being turned into a movie. Has the casting process started? And
No.
is there a release date?
Yeah, so there isn't a release date. The casting process hasn't started. I realized that making a movie is just as slow as publishing a book, and my book took years. So right now, they're in the very beginning process. They're very excited and enthusiastic. However, what they've done so far is they've hired a screenwriter, and she's working on drafts of the script. And then after that, they're going to go about and try to get a cast, get directors, and things like that. But they're at that level, which I'm told is very fast for Hollywood. It's that means that there's good progress. So
That's awesome.
yeah, and also the minute I kind of signed away an option, it's in their hands now. So they'll inform me what's going on, but I'm certainly not part of it anymore. But it's very exciting.
Yeah, for sure. So a question from Andy. The question he has is, how do you remember to do proper grammar or follow CP style guidelines? What is, I'm guessing, your secret to always being on point for CP style?
My secret is Google. Actually, my editors have, because I don't come from a journalism background. I write a column in the life section, and it's very much soft news. So my editors have been very generous with their time. I learned a lot just by going through the editing process at the Toronto Star. In terms of proper grammar, I'm a high school teacher that has a lot, high school English teacher, so that has a lot to do with that. And in terms of CP style, I'm sure there's a book. I don't really know. But
there is.
Yeah, it's practice, right? It's getting used to it. And I've been writing the column for over 5 years now, and it's gotten better as I've practiced and improved.
Very good. Thank you. It's of course very important to have a really good editor.
Yes, it's very important. Yeah.
And a last question. You said AYESHA at Last ties to Pride and Prejudice. What was one way to entice others into reading the book, and why did you think it was important not to tell the story that others are familiar with?
You said was a way to entice others into. Why did you think it was important?
To
tell the story that others are familiar with?
So the comment Muslim story that others are used to seeing. Why do you think it was important to tell your version?
I guess because the version that is told, so there's a very famous Nigerian writer, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and she wrote she's written a lot of novels and nonfiction, and one of the ways she propelled herself to fame was through this TED Talk called "The Dangers of the Single Story." And it was all about how when she, as a Nigerian woman, went to the United States for the first time, her roommate was surprised that she loved Mariah Carey because she was from Africa, And so for me, growing up, all the books that I read, the few books I read about South Asians or about Muslims, they're all about the same thing. They're about forced arranged marriages, or they were about, parents who were disowning their children because of the choices they had made. And I was like, that's not my experience at all. That's not the experience of anyone I know. And this is the problem. This is the danger of a single story that has been told about this community for so long. It has come to be seen as fact when actually it's just a tiny portion of our experience. And I said, let's just open up the doors a little bit and write about other things.
That's very important. It's important to have your own voice.
Yeah.
And those are all the questions from the audience. Thank you so much.
Yeah, great questions.
Thank you so much for being here with us today, Uzma.
It was my
It was an
pleasure.
honor. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. So, Akrid, do you want to